The first night I stayed alone in my uncle's farmhouse, I noticed a light turn on inside the abandoned house across the road, in the exact same room where I had just turned mine on. My uncle's house sat on a narrow county road in northern West Virginia, the kind of road that didn't show up properly on GPS unless you zoomed all the way in. There were no streetlights, no sidewalks, no stores within walking distance, and no neighbors close enough to hear you if something went wrong.
The house itself was old, but not falling apart. It was a white two-story farmhouse with a sagging porch, storm windows, a gravel driveway, and a long field behind it that rolled into the woods.
My uncle had owned it for almost 20 years, but after his divorce, he barely stayed there anymore. That summer, he offered to let me live there for free while I took online classes and helped him clean the place up before he decided whether to sell it. I was 21 at the time and thought it sounded perfect. Free rent, quiet space, no roommates, no campus noise, and nothing to do at night except study or watch movies. The only thing I didn't like was the house across the road. It sat directly opposite my uncle's place, separated by maybe 80 yards of cracked asphalt and tall roadside grass. It was smaller than my uncle's house, darker, and in much worse shape. The paint had peeled down to gray wood. Half the porch leaned to one side. The upstairs windows were cloudy with dust, and the downstairs windows had old curtains hanging behind them, yellowed and stiff like they had been there for decades. When my uncle dropped me off the first afternoon, I asked him who owned it. He looked across the road for a second longer than he needed to and said, "Nobody you'll ever meet." Then he pulled 2 boxes from the back of his truck like that answered the question. I laughed a little and asked if it was abandoned. He said it had been empty since before he bought his place. Some family had lived there a long time ago, but there had been a fire in the back part of the house, and after that, no one stayed. The counter never tore it down because the land ownership was tied up in some old estate dispute. That was all he said about it. Before he left, my uncle walked me through the house and showed me the fuse box, the water shutoff, the weak spots in the porch steps, and the shotgun he kept unloaded in the hall closet. He told me cell service was bad inside, better near the upstairs front window, and best if I stood out by the mailbox. Then he gave me one rule that sounded strange at the time. "Don't go poking around across the road," he said. "Floor's probably rotten. You get hurt in there, nobody's finding you quick." That first evening was normal. I unpacked, swept the kitchen, made instant noodles, and sat at the small table by the window with my laptop. The sun went down behind the trees, and the road disappeared into blackness. Out there, dark wasn't just a lack of light. It felt physical, like something pressing against the glass. Around 10:30, I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs to the front bedroom, the one my uncle said had the best air circulation. I switched on the lamp beside the bed, pulled the curtain halfway closed, and looked across the road without really meaning to. A light was on in the abandoned house. It was upstairs, in the room directly across from mine. At first, I just stared. The window glowed faintly, not bright like a modern bulb, but dull and yellow, the way old lamps look in movies. I was sure it hadn't been on before. I had looked at that house several times during the day, and every window had been dead black. Bond. My first thought was that some kids were inside messing around, or maybe a homeless person had found a way in. I stood by the window for a minute, expecting to see movement. Nothing moved. The light just sat there in the upstairs room, steady and weak. I called my uncle. The call dropped twice before it connected. I told him there was a light on across the road, and he was quiet for a second. Then he said it was probably reflection from my own room. I turned my lamp off while I was still on the phone. Across the road, the yellow light went out at the exact same time. I remember the silence after that. Not from my uncle, from me. He said, "See? Reflection." But his voice sounded too casual, like he had decided on the explanation before hearing the whole thing. I wanted to believe him, so I did. I closed the curtain all the way, got into bed, and told myself old windows could do strange things at night. I even turned the lamp on and off once more, just to prove it to myself. But I didn't look across the road when I did it. The next night it happened again. I had spent most of the day cleaning the downstairs rooms. The house smelled like dust, old wood, and the lemon cleaner my uncle had left under the sink. By evening, I was tired enough to fall asleep early, but around midnight, I woke up thirsty and went downstairs. I turned on the kitchen light, filled a glass from the sink, and looked out the window above it. Across the road, the downstairs kitchen window of the abandoned house glowed yellow. Same side of the house, same position as mine. I turned my kitchen light off. The light across the road went dark. I turned it on again. The abandoned house lit up again. I stood there with my hand still on the switch, feeling stupid and terrified at the same time. I told myself it had to be some kind of reflection off the glass, but the angle was wrong. My kitchen window faced straight across the road, yes, but the other house sat lower on the land, and the glass in its windows was too dirty to reflect anything clearly. Also, the light across the road didn't look like a reflection. It looked like a lamp inside a room. It had depth. It touched the curtains from behind. That was when I noticed the delay. When I flipped my light off, the other light went off maybe 1 second later. When I flipped mine on, it came on 1 second later. Not much, barely noticeable, but enough that my brain understood it wasn't a reflection. I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next few days, I tried not to look at the house. That sounds cowardly, but when you're alone in a place like that, you learn very quickly that some fears get worse the more attention you give them. During the day, the abandoned house looked empty and dead. No cars, no footprints, no open doors. I checked from my side of the road and saw nothing that suggested anyone was living there. But at night, if I moved through my uncle's house and turned on a light, a matching light would come on across the road. Living room, kitchen, upstairs bedroom, bathroom. Always the room that lined up closest with mine. Always a little late. By the fourth night, I started recording it on my phone. The video didn't capture it well because of the distance and darkness, but you could still see enough. My room going bright, then the window across the road glowing after it. I sent the clip to my uncle. He didn't answer for almost an hour. When he finally called, he sounded irritated, but not surprised. He told me old farmhouses sometimes had electrical issues, and maybe someone had connected power illegally years ago. I asked him how the lights could know which room I was in. He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "Just keep your curtains closed." That was the first time I realized he knew more than he was telling me. The copying didn't stop with lights. On the fifth night, I was standing in the upstairs front bedroom, looking out from behind the curtain. The abandoned house was dark. I raised one hand slowly, just testing something I already regretted testing. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, in the opposite upstairs window, a pale shape appeared behind the dirty glass. It was too far away to see clearly, but it looked like a person standing in the room, facing me. I froze with my hand still raised. The figure raised its hand too, not at the same time. A moment after me, I dropped my hand. It dropped its hand. I stepped back from the window. The figure stepped back too, fading into the dark room until I couldn't see it anymore. I packed a bag that night. I really did. I threw clothes, my charger, my wallet, and my laptop into a duffel bag and went downstairs. I had my keys in my hand. I was ready to drive to the nearest motel and call my uncle from there. But when I opened the front door, the porch light across the road came on. That light had not copied anything. My uncle's porch light was off. The abandoned house was lit from the outside now, a weak yellow bulb above its crooked porch, swinging slightly even though there was no wind. And standing beneath it, at the edge of the porch, was a person. I couldn't see a face, just a dark figure, average height, standing still with its arms at its sides. It wasn't waving. It wasn't copying me. It was just watching my door. I stepped back inside and locked the deadbolt. For the next half hour, I sat in the hallway with the unloaded shotgun across my knees like an idiot, trying to convince myself to call 911. But what would I say? There's someone standing on the porch of an abandoned house. By the time a deputy came all the way out there, whoever it was would probably be gone. Or worse, the deputy would go inside, find nothing, and leave me alone with whatever I had just angered. Eventually, I crawled upstairs and looked through the smallest gap in the curtain. The porch light was off. The figure was gone. The next morning, I walked out to the mailbox because that was where my phone got the best service, and I called my uncle again. This time, I didn't let him brush me off. I told him about the figure, the lights, the copying, everything. He sighed and said my name in that exhausted way adults use when they're about to admit something they wish they didn't have to. Then he told me that when he first bought the farmhouse, he had seen lights across the road too. Not every night, not as clearly as I was seeing them, but enough that he stopped using the front rooms after dark. He said his ex-wife hated the place because she always felt watched. One night she claimed she saw herself in the upstairs window of the abandoned house, wearing the same blue nightgown she had on, except the other version of her was smiling. They moved out less than a month later. I asked him why he didn't tell me that before letting me stay there. He said, because I thought it had stopped. I wanted to be angry, but I was too scared. I asked him what the house wanted. He said he didn't know. He said the old family who lived there had been strange, private people. There were rumors, but rural towns are built out of rumors. The only thing he knew for sure was that the last owner had disappeared after the fire. Not died, disappeared. They found signs that someone had been living in the house afterward, but never found the person. Then my uncle said something that made my skin go cold. Whatever you do, don't let it see you leave. I asked him what that meant. He said pack during the day, park your car behind the house, leave from the back road if you can. There was no back road, not anymore. The old farm lane behind the property had been swallowed by weeds and trees years ago. My car was already in the gravel driveway, visible from the house across the road. I told him that. He cursed under his breath and said he would drive out after work, but he was 3 hours away and couldn't leave until evening. I spent the rest of the day packing everything I could. I kept the curtains closed. I didn't turn on any lights. I moved quietly, like noise mattered. Around 6, clouds rolled in and the sky turned the color of dirty water. By 7, it was raining hard enough to blur the windows. My uncle called and said he was on the road, but traffic was bad near Charleston. He told me to stay inside and not look across the road. That is exactly what I tried to do. But around 9, while I was sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, I heard a knock. Not on my door, from across the road. 3 slow knocks, faint but clear, carried through the rain. I held my breath. 3 more knocks answered from inside my house. They came from the front door. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The knocking stopped. Then the floorboards creaked in the living room. That was when I understood the copying had changed direction. Before, the house across the road had copied me. Now my house was copying it. Another creak sounded from the living room, closer this time. I could picture the space perfectly. The old couch, the covered fireplace, the front window with the curtain pulled shut. Something was moving in there, slow and careful, matching steps I couldn't see across the road. I grabbed my phone and crawled toward the back door. I didn't stand up. I was afraid that if I stood, something in the living room would stand too. The back door was in the mudroom, past the laundry machines. I reached it, turned the lock as quietly as I could, and opened it just enough to slip outside. Rain hit me cold and hard. I ran around the back of the house, through wet grass and mud, keeping low beneath the windows. My car was parked on the side driveway, maybe 30 feet away. I had the key in my hand. Then every light in my uncle's house turned on at once. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway, the upstairs bedroom, even the bathroom. Across the road, every window in the abandoned house lit up 1 second later. I stopped beside my car and looked, despite everything in me screaming not to. Every window of the abandoned house was filled with people. Not clear people, and not normal people. Dark shapes standing shoulder to shoulder behind the filthy glass, all facing my direction. Some were tall, some were low to the ground. Some looked bent wrong, like they had been standing in cramped spaces for too long. But the upstairs front window was the worst. In that window stood a figure wearing my gray hoodie, my jeans, my white shoes. It raised one hand. I did not raise mine. For the first time, it moved without me. Then the figure in my clothes turned away from the window and walked deeper into the abandoned house. A second later, I heard footsteps inside my uncle's house, directly behind me. I got into the car so fast I barely remember opening the door. The engine didn't catch on the first try. It clicked once, and in that 1 second, I looked into the rearview mirror. The back door of my uncle's house was open. A person stood in the doorway, half hidden by rain and porch shadow. It was wearing my gray hoodie. The engine started. I reversed so hard, gravel sprayed under the tires, then swung onto the road without looking. As I passed the abandoned house, I saw its front door standing wide open. The porch was empty. The windows were dark again. But just before the house disappeared behind me, I saw someone standing at the upstairs window of my uncle's farmhouse, not across the road, my uncle's house. The figure watched me leave, one hand pressed flat against the glass. My uncle met me at a gas station 20 miles away. I was soaked, shaking, and barely able to explain what happened. We stayed at a motel, and the next morning he drove out there with me in daylight. Nothing looked disturbed from the outside. My car tracks were in the gravel. The back door was closed. The abandoned house across the road looked dead and empty again. Inside my uncle's house, all my packed bags were sitting neatly in the living room. I had left them upstairs. On top of the first bag was my gray hoodie, folded carefully. It was dry. My uncle sold the farmhouse 6 months later to a land company that planned to tear it down and use the fields for storage. I looked it up once, almost a year after it sold. The county property photos showed my uncle's house still standing, windows boarded, grass grown high around the porch. Across the road, the abandoned house was still there too. No one had touched it. I saved one of the photos before closing the website. I don't know why. Maybe part of me needed proof that I hadn't imagined the place. In the photo, both houses looked empty. But in the upstairs front window of my uncle's old farmhouse, behind one of the boards, there was a narrow gap just wide enough to see darkness inside. And in that darkness, if I zoomed in far enough, I could see the faint outline of a person standing at the glass, one hand raised, like it was still waiting for me to wave back.